Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Babbling Eyes match preview with myself today. West Ham taking on Newcastle at home on Sunday in a very important game for West Ham. More important, I would say, for West Ham than Newcastle, given the current predicament of West Ham at the moment. And Newcastle seem to have hit some form at a really good time after their Arsenal defeat a few weeks back now. I think they've won 5 of their last 6 games, so they've really picked things up. Less said for West Ham, the better. Really, really struggling, still really struggling, even with Nuno now in charge. And the most recent defeats we've had to Brentford and Leeds within the span of 5 days has really sucked out a lot of the confidence, not just of the fan base, but of the players and, to be honest, West Ham behind the scenes as well. But we're going to break down how West Ham can try and get some success from this game against Newcastle on Sunday in the Premier League. So if you enjoy it, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. And just as an overall starting point, I think we tend to play better in these types of occasions historically. Obviously, recently we haven't been. I think any team that comes to the London Stadium fancies their chances against West Ham because of just how poor we've been defensively, going forwards, in the middle third of the pitch. We've been second best across pretty much every department. And it was the same against Leeds in the last game. We were second to every ball. Leeds wanted it more. Leeds don't have better players than West Ham when you look at the teams on paper, but they had a team that wanted it more and a team that was working together and a team, as I alluded to in the review show, a team that isn't scared of the ball or scared of making errors or just shying away from things, which I think a lot of our players do and are doing at the moment, which is costing us big time in the Premier League. And, now we're in a situation where our Premier League status is very much in jeopardy, big time. And we need to address it starting against Newcastle because the fixtures are not going to get much easier than this. We've got the likes of Man City, Liverpool. Obviously, Newcastle is a very tough game as well coming up in the next few weeks. And, when we were looking on paper at Brentford and Leeds, they were the winnable games and we've lost both of them. So now the pressure's on to get results from these types of games when it shouldn't be because of the predicament we're in. But let's take a look at the tail of the tape between both sides this season because yeah, it's been a little bit of an indifferent start from both teams, to say the least. So starting with West Ham, only on 4 points still so far this season. We've scored just 7 goals and conceded 20, which is the most in the league. And we find ourselves in 19th position. When we look at the expected data from this season so far, we should have a couple more points on 6.41. Goals scored is pretty much equal at 7.43. Goals conceded, again, very similar, slightly over conceded on the actual data, comparing to 18.90. But the expected position puts us in 19th as well. So you can't say that we don't deserve to be where we are because we absolutely do when you look at the data and the statistics behind West Ham's season so far. We deserve to be 19th. I think you don't even need data to see that. I think every West Ham fan or neutral fan that is watching West Ham games at the moment is pretty online with that and understands that West Ham are in a very difficult situation. And when we look at Newcastle, slightly different. So they're on 12 points compared to our 4. They've scored 9 goals, so they are also struggling in front of goal. They've conceded just 8 goals, though, which is very impressive. And they do find themselves in 12th, which is not where they want to be, given the start of the season that they had wasn't great, but they have started to pick things back up. When we look at the expected data, they are trailing behind a little bit. So expected points of 15.98, expected goals scored of 13.63. But expected goals conceded of 7.35 is outstanding, which we'll get onto in a second. And again, looking at the expected data, it has Newcastle in 4th. So I think Newcastle, we'll start there before we go into West Ham. I think Newcastle are obviously going through a transitional period because when you're losing someone like Isak, who was so influential to their attack last season and the season before that, it's a massive blow. Not just because of the player he is, but also what happened in the summer. So much talk around Isak, off the pitch, on the pitch, what was happening. Newcastle managed to recruit really well in the end and brought in Voltamade to replace him as the striker, which is a fantastic signing. And he's now starting to score the goals that everyone knew he would. And the talent that he has is unbelievable. So it's kind of filled that gap very quickly for Newcastle. So now it's how can they use that as a platform to kick on. But I think that was probably contributing to their wobbly starts of the season. But they do have some very, very good players in their team. Bruno Guimaraes is a player I'm a massive fan of and have been since he signed for Newcastle. Obviously, Anthony Gordon, we know what he brings on that left-hand side for Newcastle. And then you've got the likes of Alanga, Harvey Barnes, Murphy. They've got options going forwards. And their midfield, I think they need to look to replace Joe Linton in that midfield three. I think he's served his purpose in that Newcastle midfield. So bringing in someone a little bit more dynamic and better on the ball, who has that physicality that can play in alongside a Tonali and a Bruno, would elevate that midfield for Newcastle. But look, they're playing Champions League football. They're going to be competing for the top four again this season. That's now the benchmark for Newcastle. 5 years ago, we were in a very similar situation to Newcastle, where we're both battling out for relegation. They've obviously had a influx since the owners came in, and they've just completely transformed their club. And I don't think their fans could be closer to how their club is being run right now. And you contrast that to West Ham, it's just the polar opposite. So this is going to be a very, very tough game for West Ham. And Newcastle are going to come here with the intention of not just winning the game, but winning the game convincingly, because that's what you would look to do. If you're looking at a team that's 19th in the league and has been so poor, why wouldn't you fancy your chances to go there and make a statement? And as I mentioned, they've won their last three in a row against Benfica, Fulham, and Tottenham. So now they're going to try and stamp their mark again and make their mark against West Ham at the London Stadium on Sunday in the Premier League and push their way up, because they're in 12th. Again, the expected data has them in fourth. I feel like they are underperforming, and they have underperformed, especially at the beginning of the season. But things are starting to click now for Newcastle and Eddie Howe, and they've got the talent to be a top four team. I have no doubts about that. But again, when we look at West Ham and our start, as we saw in the data there, we are expected to be in 19th. We deserve to be in 19th. We are in 19th. We can look at data all day long. We're in a very difficult situation right now, because the longer these weeks go on, the more we're going to get adrift of the rest of the pack. And, being on 4 points, only Wolves obviously below us in the league at the moment, makes for pretty grim reading. And it's hard as a West Ham fan to visualize where the points are going to come from, because of the difficulties of the fixtures and due to the fact that we've failed to get any points from Brentford and Leeds in recent weeks. So I think most West Ham fans are going to the London Stadium not full of confidence at all, the complete opposite. And Newcastle have got a little bit of a spring in their step, given the recent run of form that they're in. But let's just summarize with Newcastle's season so far and look at that data in a bit more detail. So they do have the seventh weakest defensive record in the Premier League so far, with just 9 goals scored. However, when you look at the expected data, they're the 8th strongest. So they have been massively underperforming in front of goal, which again alludes to the fact that they haven't had that clinical finisher in Isak to put chances away. And now Voltemade is starting to do that. It will balance out. But defensively, they've been outstanding, not just in terms of the goals they've conceded, but also the expected data. So they find themselves in fifth as a fifth best defensive record in the Premier League with just 8 conceded. And they're the second strongest expected defensive record in the Premier League with just 7.35 expected goals against. Only Arsenal are better than that. They're averaging 1 goal per game. They're averaging 0.89 goals conceded per game. And they're averaging just shy of 50% possession in the Premier League so far. So defensively, it's going to be extremely difficult for West Ham to break through this Newcastle team. We're going to have to look for transitions. We're going to have to be very pragmatic at times, but there needs to be a balance between pragmatism and intensity, which we haven't seen so far under Nuno, to be honest, in any of the games. I think we saw glimpses of it against Everton, but the rest has just been a passive watch. Brentford, Leeds, Arsenal, all very passive performances from West Ham, which you can't do against a team like Newcastle because they're so physical and intense. They're just going to run through you if you do that and allow them the time and space on the ball. So we're going to have to be realistic. We have to defend coherently. We have to have a structure about us. But more importantly, the players have to want to win their challenges. They cannot be shying away from their duels, because that's where this game is going to be won or lost against a team like Newcastle. I think in terms of the quality, yes, obviously Newcastle has some fantastic players, but we have some very good players as well. But when you're looking at Somerville, Bowen, look, Paqueta's indifferent at the moment, but we've got some quality in our squad that can hurt teams, and we've shown that. We've shown that over the last few years. So there's going to be chances against this Newcastle team, but we have to win our duels first. We have to be more physical than we have been, and that starts with the spine of the team, and that's where the issues currently lie, because obviously Mavropanos is going to be injured now for, I think, 5-6 weeks. He's torn his hamstring. So we're kind of left with our centre-back rotation of Kilman, Todibo, and Igor, who we're not going to see really. So you're left with Kilman and Todibo. Both of those players have been massively underperforming and, to be honest, shying away from their duels, which you can't have from your centre-backs, because that's just setting the precedent for other players in the team to do the exact same, which you cannot do. So for me, it's going to be a very tough game, not just because of the quality Newcastle have, but because of the physicality and the lack of physicality West Ham currently have within our team. But I I think Nuno got it massively wrong against Brentford and Leeds in terms of his team selection. So this is going to be a really interesting approach from Nuno. Does he go to a back five again? Does he accommodate and maybe bring in Wan-Bissaka into the back three and bring in a Kyle Walker-Peters? Does he look to overload the midfield because we know Newcastle are going to play that 4-3-3 and try and match them in terms of numbers and play a back four? I don't know. I would predict that he's going to stick with the back four for now, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if he goes to the back five, to be honest, because of how fragile we've been defensively. And yeah, I guess that kind of segues me in nicely into the predicted lineups for West Ham. So there isn't much else we can do, but we cannot have a midfield pivot of Irving and Souček. So I think Magassa will come into that midfield to play alongside a Souček just to offer a bit more physicality against that Newcastle midfield. And I think Paqueta will probably start over Fernandez as the other midfielder. And then defensively, I just don't see there being any changes, whether that's Areola in goal, whether that's the back four. And then the front three is difficult to pick, other than obviously Somerville and Bowen, who we know will probably start. When we're looking at the striker position, that's where we really struggle. And that's where we're going to massively struggle because Callum Wilson, he'll be up for this game, which is why I've predicted him to start this game. That and the fact we don't have another striker in our team right now. But I think Wilson will start because of the context of this game and also the context of what happened against Leeds and Brentford without him starting. And we tried a few different things, it just didn't work. So I think Nuno will want Paqueta in that midfield, and I don't think he'll trust Marshall to start. So I think Wilson is the natural pick as the striker. And then obviously Bowen and Somerville are pretty much nailed on starters at the moment for the right wing and the left wing position. So then you're looking at that midfield. Do you bring in someone like a Freddie Potts? Do you bring in Fernandez, who obviously got a goal off the bench against Leeds as well? There's a few different things he'll do. And to be honest, Souček hasn't been great. But these are the types of games and the types of moments in a season where you need characters like Thomas Souček in your team. He just needs to be playing in a midfield that accommodates for him. That's always been the thing with Souček. Because we saw with Irving, he just looked so much worse. And Irving looked so much worse because they were both so similar in their characteristics in terms of their dynamism and athleticism in midfield. They just look out of place against the Leeds midfield. So when you're talking about Bruno, Tonali, again, Joe Linton, those types of players that are physical, they are engine runners, and they are creative at the same time and have that blend between the three of them. You're going to need players that can be combative, which I think Paqueta can be. Souček, who's going to be the physicality of that midfield, and also Magassa, just to bring a little bit of an assurance to that midfield and a bit more of an engine than say Andy Irving will be if he was playing at the pivot. So there's a few things Nuno can do, but the pressure's massively on Nuno now because he needs to get a win, and he needs to get a win very, very quickly at West Ham before people start pointing fingers, because Nuno was brought in to steady the ship. We've had, in the fixtures he's played so far, we've played Everton, Arsenal, Leeds, and Brentford. He's had a pretty nice fixture list there, to be honest, to get maybe 4 points from those four fixtures. But we haven't. We've managed 1 point from those four fixtures. So the pressure's on. The pressure's on, not just for him individually, but for West Ham holistically, because we are in danger of going down. And if we don't address it very quickly, we will go down. I said it in the Leeds review. We will go down because it doesn't matter what quality we have within the squad. If you're not prepared to mentally and physically be ready for this type of battle in a relegation, we'll go down because there's other teams that will pick up points above us. And, no team has the right to be a Premier League team. You have to earn it. You don't just walk your way into a Premier League and stay there. So it's going to be tough. In terms of my predictions for the game, I'm hoping that the crowd get behind a team. I think obviously what's happened with the protests and stuff, absolutely justified, and absolutely agree with what happened against Brentford with the boycott. But this is a really good chance now to get behind the team and get behind Nuno and not give the players any excuses to get away from the performance on the pitch. Because, when Nuno first came in, he was talking about making it hell for teams to come to the London Stadium. Well, now we need to make that happen. And we need to play a part in that. But the players, it needs to come from the players on the pitch. If we start with a very high intensity, keep the crowd up, the energy will be reciprocated in this type of game, in this context. It will. The fans will be up for it. So, it depends on the approach from the players, and that will stem the reaction from the crowd. But it's hard to predict anything else other than a West Ham loss, really, isn't it? Because of the situation we're in, and because we're coming up against a very talented Newcastle team that are, playing in the Champions League, and have won 5 of their last 6 games in all competitions. So I'm going to say a 2-1 Newcastle win. I think we're going to have a better performance. I think the players are going to show a little bit more fight in this game. I just think it's going to be too soon for us to pick up points. I hope I'm wrong. But yeah, I mean, we lose this game, the pressure's still going to be on regardless of how we play. But we need to see a performance from this game. We need to see a team that is together. We need to see a team that is ready to fight for this status in the Premier League. And we need to see a team that is together, which isn't easy to see at the moment because of the individuals that are, walking on the pitch, not really approaching the game how they should be, shying away from their duels. We need those types of players to then step up and take some accountability now because, yeah, we're getting very, very close to the Christmas period where games will come thick and fast and we could find ourselves, a few points out inside the relegation zone, trying to crawl out of it going into the new year. But we'll see what happens. Let me know down below in the comments what are your predictions for the game. I'm thinking 2-1 Newcastle. And what would you like to see from the lineups? Would you bring in a Magassa or a Freddie Potts into midfield? Who would you start as striker? And would you stick with a back four of Kilman and Todibo, or would you bring in Igor or go to a back three? Loads of different things for Nuno and yourselves to pick from. So let me know down below in the comments. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed the preview, as always, as that massively helps us out. Subscribe to the channel for more content. And until next time, come on, you irons.